This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Let's speak out an observation of the Shel HaKadosh to explain a very interesting practice that Klal Yisrael had for many generations. The Shel HaKadosh in Parshas Vayishav Miketz Vayigash in Ois Chav Zayin through Chav Ches explains the role of Yosef HaTzadik in Mitzrayim and really throughout history vis-a-vis the job of Shevet Yehuda and Malchus Beis David as well. Shel HaKadosh says that Malchus always rests in the hands of Shevet Yehuda and the Malchus Beis David. However, when Yosef had his aspirations of Malchus, it was not to be the Melech Yisrael, because that only can rest in the hands of Shevet Yehuda. But instead, Yosef plays a very important role of Klal Yisrael, and that is he forges the Jewish people into a nation. He is the Yisoid. Yosef, as we say, the Tzaddik, Yosef, who's the Tzaddik, is Yisoid Olam. We need the foundation of Yosef to forge the Jewish people into an Am in order for us to have a Melech. So Yosef in Mitzrayim galvanized and gathered and consolidated and collected Klal Yisrael and empowered Klal Yisrael and forged Klal Yisrael to become a nation. And whereupon, upon the Exodus, Yehuda took over and began the Malchus of Yisrael. So in Mitzrayim, Yosef, the Shel HaKadosh says, was Roishem li Yisrael. Without Yosef, we would still be Meshubad. Yosef forged us into a people. Yosef was the Tzinar HaKedusha. And then, as soon as we left Mitzrayim, says the Shel HaKadosh, Uvetzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, immediately what do we say in Tehillim? Ha'isa Yehuda l'Kadshay, Parak Kuf Yodalad. And that is the beginning of the Malchus of Shevet Yehuda. Likewise, the Shel HaKadosh, the Bnei Yissaschar in Mamari Nisan and Mamari Yud Gimel pinpoints precisely that the Malchus Beis David actually began when Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into the Yam on Shvi'i Shel Pesach. That until he jumped Ad Choitmai, he jumped b'Mesiras Nefesh, and at that moment he was Zoichet to Melucha. Now, other times in history, Shevet Binyamin also, who is Shevet Binyamin, also began the process of the Melucha for Klal Yisrael. For example, Shel HaMelech, who was consolidated Klal Yisrael to become a nation, whereupon after him, Shel only borrowed the Melucha, and then David took over. And this was also experienced Al Hayam. The Gemara in Soita says in Lamed Zayin that when Shevet Binyamin jumped into the Yam, they were also Zoicha to temporary Melucha through Shaul from Shevet Binyamin. So there's this concept that Yosef and Binyamin, they consolidate, they empower Klal Yisrael to become an Am, and then the Malchus Beis David takes over. Again, the Shla says, B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Ha'isa Yehuda l'Kadshay. And the Bnei Yissaschar writes, it was at the moment that Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into Yam. Therefore, the Bnei Yissaschar points out something very interesting. He says, Minhag Avosenu Torah, that in Jewish communities throughout the world, the appointments were accomplished and were administered, and they were voted on beginning Shvi'i Shel Pesach. Shvi'i Shel Pesach, the Bnei Yissaschar writes, was Hismanus Harishain of for all the Kehilos in Klal Yisrael. And the reason is because since Malchus Beis David began, that's when Malchus Beis David started, when Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into Yam. So that was really the beginning of Malchus Beis David, and therefore Minhag Yisrael is to appoint all the Parnosim in Klal Yisrael beginning Shvi'i Shel Pesach. And the Bnei Yissaschar also points out another reason why these appointments began on Shvi'i Shel Pesach is because the leaders of Klal Yisrael are called Parnosim. And as we mentioned in a previous shiur, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mavarech Klal Yisrael with Parnasa on Shvi'i Shel Pesach. And we see that the sustenance of Klal Yisrael is very much connected to their leaders. Let's say, for example, Megillas Rus begins, Vahi b'mei Shvait hashoftim, and Chazal say, we judged our rulers, so because the rulers were weak, Vahi rav ba'aretz, there was famine, until Malchus Beis David was strengthened, and Bayaz came, and there was Soiva ba'olam. Now, since Shvi'i Shel Pesach is the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides Klal Yisrael with Parnasa, as we mentioned, the Bnei Yissaschar says he heard from the mouth of Rabbi Tzvi Hersh Mizidachov that the Heter of Meleches Oichel Nefesh was written specifically by Shvi'i Shel Pesach. So since it's a day of sustenance, Parnasa for Klal Yisrael, therefore the Parnasim traditionally are appointed on Shvi'i, Shel, Pesach. So we should be Zoicha on this Yom Tif, Shvi'i, Shel, Pesach, the day that Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into the Yam. We should be Zoicha to the beginning, the seeds, the origins of Malchus Beis David. We should be Zoicha ben David, Yavai v'Yigaleinu Memher v'Yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.